What are the different? Now we're coming to the role of the state and the governance, and we'd like to know what are the difference between the Washington Consensus and the Santiago Consensus, and what its relation or impact or nexus with the case of Dubai model.
Yes. Again, going back, 1998, not 1998, I'm sorry, but 1980. You would say from a development perspective, there was a massive change in economic understanding. Before that, you would basically say that the state was to play a large role in all development effort. You know, both in sort of first world countries and you know in the sort of what we call at that time the developing countries. You know, but a lot of money was not used properly, and governments were probably too weak. Now we're talking about basically Latin America, and we ended up in a situation where Mexico was just about going bankrupt. And that's where the Washington Consensus gets into the picture, because a meeting was done in Washington, what to do with Mexico basically now defaulting their loans. That would shake the entire world economy because they've taken up so much debt. And what came out of this, that they solved the issue with Mexico, but then they said, from now on, we have a new paradigm. And that new paradigm is that you don't take up loans. Basically, you get state out of decision making, right? So basically advocate this minimal state that, again, state is out, private sector is in. And that thinking was heavily promoted by IMF and the World Bank in the 1990s and 80s and the 90s, and then it started changing. So we have 20 years where the role of the state was really downplayed, right? And then we get to this Santiago consensus, which evaluates everything we have learned over 20 years with this minimal state thinking, and the argument was in Santiago, it doesn't work. I mean, state has to be in. State has to provide public services and so on. So in one way, we return to something, not the same as before 1980, but return to a much greater room or place for the state to act after a year, basically 2000. And how does that sort of impact the model? I mean, we know that, Dubai has been a very state-centric place, or all the Gulf countries too. And basically the state never went out of decision-making, and the private market never took fully over. So I think for the Gulf states, it didn't really matter that much what the international winds said. And also because the fact that the Gulf states did not take loans from neither IMF nor the World Bank. As such, they could run their own economies with no interference.
Can we say with the degree of certainty that the post-COVID world has reinforced the Santiago Consensus as the new norm, as the global economic discourse?
Certainly, because that was one of the major lessons coming out of COVID, with that the state for this broader health issues play an enormous role. I mean, that could not have been solved by private actors. It was the state's emphasis, and the states, all over the world, their emphasis and their policies, programs that took us out of the COVID crisis. So in this way, yes, it's vindicated that the states mean a lot to societies. Yeah.
And I think that's probably is the natural order of things, that you need intervention at a certain stage to correct the imbalances, and probably that's what the Santiago Consensus is trying to convey.
Yes. Yeah, in a more economic sense, it is sort of externalities and so on, that economies, with all the imperfections there are in markets, cannot run itself. And you cannot have a health sector where, I mean, which is completely privatized, because then you would lose people in the process and these things. So yeah, it's certainly a vindication of the model.
Okay. Going back to our next question, what are the characteristics of the development state paradigm or the cohesive capitalist states, and how it can be applied to the case of East Asia, Miracle, namely South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and the case of Dubai in particular?
Yes. This development state paradigm, which is also very much of the theoretical underpinning of this paper or article, is it was a guy called Johnson Chalmers who analyzed the growth process of Japan after Second World War, and he came out. He defined this term, and he basically said, analyzed Japan and said, well, what is characteristic about Japan and other countries who had done well economically is that they have a centralized government. They have and this government has a economic unit called economic department, a central unit where the economy is managed from. It has a very capable bureaucracy, and it has, and then two sort of really defining thing, it has what we call embedded autonomy. And that's a strange concept, but basically it's about that government on one side is embedded with the private sector, or in the way that there are very, very dense ties between them. So the government knows the needs and the opportunities of the private sector, and on the other hand, the private sector knows where the government wants to go. So they are very, very much interlinked. So the best economies, they would claim, within development stage theory, has this sort of embeddedness that government and private sector works very, very tightly together. And then the last item for this developmental stage theory is this, that the government is active and it's interventionistic. Right? Japan government created various type of state organized businesses and created a lot of stuff and so on, and so that's important, and this is basically I think very applicable to most of the Gulf countries and to Dubai, especially, that you have interventionistic state. You have great ambitions of catching up and modernizing and growth, economic growth. You have this embeddedness with the private sector. We know the ruling family, are buying part, are part with their own money in projects, and which is also, run by the public sector, no, the private sector, and so on. So, and some of the princes are business people themselves, and so on. So in this way, this is close interlinkage between, which is embedded autonomy, with decision making in private sector. So this is a developmental state paradigm, that you have a state that really wants development and wants to make things happen, and then that's certainly an interesting thing.
Thank you, Professor. Going to our next question. A comprehensive development strategy involve a collaborative decision-making process, and create a collective vision and action plan aimed at realizing improved governance, increased economic growth and employment and development. To what extent the role of visioning and strategizing by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum was instrumental in the realization of the Dubai model?
I mean, the role of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid cannot be overstated. Simply because his visions, because of his drive, and that also relates to his father, Sheikh Rashid. So having a very, very dynamic person at the helm makes a lot of difference. So no doubt about that. And as I was saying before, with this developmental state paradigm, this thing about embedded autonomy is super important. It's super important so private business know what government wants and the other way around. And in this way, the vision and the strategies set out by the ruler is communicated very, very easily and you know, clear to the private sector, which makes them work towards the same direction. I mean, in the old days, if we look at Russia and so on, Soviet Union thing, you would have a controlled or planned economy, where you would make 5-year plans, right? That would be like a completely state run thing. This is not what is done in Dubai. It's sort of we call it new type planning, where the visions, the government, the rulers, they set out visions, and then they hope and expect private sector to follow, right? And this is pretty much the strategy employed in Dubai. So the visions sent out by Sheikh Mohammed, and also, I mean, the officers, you know, is certainly driving the economy in the direction that he basically saying, and because of the interlinkage in the economy between private and the public sector and the royals, then it's also probably a good idea for the private sector to follow the lead of Mohammed bin Rashid and Sheikh Mohammed, sorry. So his role cannot be overstated.
Thank you, Professor Martin. The second question also relates somehow to the first, but here we're focusing at the administrative and governance and implementation process. So how do you assess His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum pragmatic approach to administration and governance in general? And I would like to stress the word pragmatic, and the implementation of comprehensive development initiative, strategy, development plan that lead to the attainment of the Dubai model.
Yeah. How I value it, I value it very strongly. I mean, I think in any good organization, it be a prime minister, it be a CEO in a private firm, and so on. We know that top management certainly matters to all degrees, and I think that exactly this thinking in Dubai, the old Rashid ruler and Sheikh Mohammed, both were extremely practical men who kept the size of the public sector down. And I think that has been a clue. I think that has been a important factor for forming the model, because it also means that if if you keep the size of the public sector down, then in one way you can decision making becomes faster, and you don't have so much red tape. But I mean, in the older days, you didn't need it. I think society in Dubai and all the states in the Gulf is getting much more complicated today than it was 10 years ago, 50 years, 20, so on. Now we have to take environmental issues into consideration and all of these things. Earlier, Dubai was about 100,000 people, in the early 90s. I can't remember the number. and one ruler, basically. It was actually a very small place to run, and in this way, probably the ruler knew all the sheikhs of the tribes, and through Marchlish, things would be very close, and in this way you didn't need a very comprehensive government system and so on. So I think it was very well managed, with a drive and a clear eye on development at that time, and therefore pragmatic approach. Pragmatic means we have a problem, we solve it, and I think that is sort of one of the emblems of Dubai.
Yes, you're right. Exactly. I think if I mean, we don't have like in Dubai, there's no ideology, or UAE, there's no ideology, and there's more emphasis on development strategies and approaches. And if we can and define a doctrine that I think it will be pragmatic administration and governance. I think this is probably one of the key things, is that you're not restricted by a certain doctrine, by a certain ideology. No, you have a problem, as you mentioned, you solve it. You have a problem, you solve it.